Her life was a tapestry of glorious color, but she lived in the shadow of a single, broken thread. Lena moved through her days with the quiet precision of a weaver, her hands perpetually busy, though never on what truly mattered. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light, illuminating the still, silent forms of her shrouded tapestries. They were spectral figures, ghosts of a past she had deliberately entombed, each one a testament to her creative fire and a monument to her crippling fear of its ultimate failure. She no longer wove for the light, she mended for the shadows. Before we begin, let me ask you, have you ever carried a guilt so heavy it silenced your entire life? If stories like this speak to you, subscribe and don't miss what's coming. The only life visible in her small apartment was the mundane act of mending. Piles of torn shirts, frayed dresses, and ripped curtains arrived at her door from strangers in the neighborhood. She accepted them all, her fingers moving with a practiced, almost desperate efficiency. Each stitch was a whisper of an apology to herself, a futile attempt to repair a brokenness that ran far deeper than any fabric. She would spend hours meticulously weaving new threads into old material, creating invisible repairs. But the irony was a constant, sharp ache. She could fix the flaws of others, but she could not face her own. For decades, she had not felt the satisfying tension of a loom or the vibrant rush of color. She had traded the grand stage of creation for the small, silent penance of repair. Her most beautiful creations, the ones that had once hummed with the promise of greatness, remained hidden under white sheets. They were her greatest treasures and her most profound shames, locked away from the world and from herself. The air in her apartment smelled of old cloth and buried secrets. She moved with the silence of a librarian in a deserted library, her slippers making no sound on the worn floorboards. The world outside, with its loud cars and hurried footsteps, was a distant, alien hum. Her world was a cocoon of her own making, a self-imposed exile. She believed the only thing she deserved to create was silence and order, not the chaotic, vibrant beauty that had once defined her. The dust sheets were not just coverings, they were her own shroud, a final, definitive declaration of her surrender. Her greatest artistic triumph had been destined for a national museum, a piece she had poured her entire soul into. It was a masterpiece of 1,000 threads, each one a brushstroke of her genius, but in a single, gut-wrenching moment, a crucial thread had snapped, and the entire magnificent piece had begun to unravel, live on camera, in front of the press and the art world. It wasn't a flaw, it was a public execution of her self-worth. It was the moment she became invisible. The river was a mirror, reflecting his failures back at him. Now, for Lena, every empty space in her home was a mirror, reflecting her greatest shame back at her. The apartment, once a vibrant studio, was now a mausoleum, a life unraveled in a single, painful moment, and she had spent the rest of it trying to put the pieces back together, all while refusing to look at the biggest, most important piece of all, the one she had hidden away. Lena's apartment was a study in paradox. The living room was almost painfully minimalist, a neat, empty space with just a single armchair and a small, dusty table. It was a blank canvas, a deliberate absence of the artistic life she once led. But behind a closed door, in a small, cramped bedroom, was a monument to her artistic ghosts. Heaped in corners and piled against walls were the shrouded forms of her unfinished tapestries, some so large they sagged with their own weight. She never entered that room, not really. She would stand at the doorway, her hand on the cold doorknob, and just stare at the humps and mounds under the white sheets. It was like looking at graves. Every shape represented a project she had started with a burst of passion, only to deliberately leave a single thread hanging loose before covering it up. It was a ritual of self-sabotage, a confirmation of the belief that she was incapable of finishing anything without it falling apart. Her compulsion to mend things For others was a futile attempt to fill the gaping void inside her. She would work late into the night, the small lamp on her table casting a soft yellow glow on her calloused hands. She would trace the lines of a tear, feeling the brokenness in the fabric as if it were her own, and in a way, it was. Every completed mend was a small, hollow victory, a patch on a wound she couldn't heal, a whisper of a life she no longer had the courage to live. The apartment was not just a space, it was an emotional container. The weak, natural light that filtered through the window seemed to expose every flaw in the worn rug and the chipped paint on the windowsill. It felt judgmental, a spotlight on her quiet desperation. She would often find herself squinting, as if the very light was too much to bear, too bright for a life lived in shadow. The world had moved on, and she was still standing in the exact same spot, holding a broken thread. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. There was no music, no television, just the soft, rhythmic sound of her needle moving through fabric. It was a monotonous, comforting rhythm that kept the chaos of her memories at bay. She had built a wall of silence around herself, a barrier between her and the vibrant world she had once been a part of. The lack of sound was not peaceful. It was a constant, deafening reminder of her isolation. Her one indulgence was a single small window box on her fire escape, where she tried to grow a few sprigs of herbs. They were often wilted, clinging to life with a quiet stubbornness. They were a fragile, sad metaphor for her own existence, an attempt at growth in an environment where everything else had died. She would water them every day, a small act of care that she no longer afforded her artistic self. The tapestries were not just hidden, they were buried. She had forgotten their colors, the stories they told, the emotions they contained. They were all a single, undifferentiated mass of white fabric, a blank slate she was too afraid to even look at. They were her past, and she had condemned them to a silent, slow decay, just as she had condemned herself. It was a form of self-punishment, a permanent reminder of the one mistake that had cost her everything. And yet, somewhere in that cold, quiet space, a small part of her still clung to the memory of color, a faint, almost imperceptible heartbeat beneath the shroud of white. A small part of her still remembered the feeling of 100 threads coming together to form a beautiful, unified whole. The first note was slipped under her door, a small, folded piece of paper. "I found this," it read, in a neat, unfamiliar script. Attached was a small, frayed fragment of a tapestry, no bigger than a postcard. Lena stared at it, her heart thudding with a strange mix of dread and curiosity. The colors were familiar, a burst of deep crimson and gold she hadn't seen in decades. It was from a series she had worked on in her youth, long before the commission, a fragment she had likely discarded. Who had found this, and why were they bringing it to her? A week later, another note appeared, accompanied by a small, perfectly carved wooden loom. It was no bigger than her palm, an intricate, beautiful object with a single, perfectly smooth shuttle. The note simply said, "This felt like it belonged with the other piece." Lena felt a jolt of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Confusion, yes, but also a flicker of warmth. Someone had seen her art, a small, forgotten piece of it, and had felt something enough to bring her a gift. This small, perfect loom sat on her table for days, untouched, but not ignored. It was a silent presence, a tiny, elegant reminder of the life she had once led. The simple act of its being there felt like an intrusion, a deliberate crack in the wall of silence she had built. For the first time in decades, her art, or at least a fragment of it, was being noticed and appreciated by someone who didn't know her past. It was a connection born of pure, simple appreciation, unburdened by history. The gifts continued. A skein of rare emerald green silk thread appeared one morning, then a spool of rich indigo wool. Each time, a new note. "I thought this color was missing," or "This felt like it needed a home." The anonymous benefactor seemed to be trying to complete a picture they didn't fully understand, piece by piece, as if she were a puzzle they were trying to solve. Lena felt herself unraveling a little, the threads of her composure loosening, under the gentle, persistent pressure of this strange kindness. If this story has already touched you, imagine what's still to come. Subscribe and don't miss the next one. The most profound gift arrived a few weeks later. It was a small flash drive with a single video file on it. The note simply said, "I'm a film student. I found this and was completely fascinated. I'm so sorry if this is a mistake, but I had to ask, what happened to it? It's so beautiful." Lena's hands trembled as she plugged the drive into her old laptop. What she saw on the screen made the air catch in her throat. It was her commission. The video was from an old storage room, a dusty corner of a forgotten warehouse. The camera panned over a massive draped form. Slowly, the person filming pulled back the sheet, and there it was, her unraveled tapestry, a chaotic, tangled mess of threads, a physical representation of her public failure. The sight was a punch to the gut. The film student, unaware of its painful history, simply described its incredible potential, the fragments of beauty still visible in the chaos. The memory was a ghost, and now it had a name and a face. This wasn't just a memory, it was a raw, physical thing captured on film. But the student didn't see the failure. She saw the beauty that still existed, the promise that had been broken. Lena's artistic self, which she believed was dead, began to stir. The shock of seeing her greatest failure presented as something still beautiful was a seismic shift inside her. She watched the video over and over, her mind racing. The camera focused on a single frayed cord, a crucial thread that had been part of the tapestry structure. The student didn't know it, but that was the very thread that had snapped, the cause of the catastrophic unraveling. Lena saw it and felt a painful recognition. It was a physical reminder of the moment her life had broken apart. This connection, this stranger who saw beauty in her ruin, was a challenge to her entire identity. For decades, her life had been defined by the absence of that art. Now, this young, anonymous person was not only bringing fragments of it back to her, but was seeing them not as failures, but as mysteries to be solved. And with each gift, with each note, the wall of her self-imposed exile began to crumble, a single thread at a time. The silence was beginning to be replaced by a faint, persistent hum. The video was a catalyst, a bitter tonic that forced Lena to confront what she had spent decades avoiding. She found herself obsessively watching the clip, her eyes tracing the chaotic lines of her unraveled masterpiece. The student's voiceover, so innocent and full of wonder, felt like a deliberate accusation, a spotlight on the truth she had buried. She saw the tapestry for what it was, not a failure, but a piece of her soul, torn apart. She began to spend time in the room of her buried tapestries. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to lift the corners of the dust sheets. She remembered the stories they told, a forest of forgotten colors, a sea of stormy blues and greens, a portrait of a person she once was. The memories came flooding back, not as pain, but as a deep, profound sadness. She had abandoned them just as she had abandoned herself. Then the final gift arrived, a small, unassuming package. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a single thread. It was old, frayed, unmistakably familiar. A small note was attached. "I finally found it. The thread from the unraveled piece. I have a feeling it's the most important one." Lena stared at the thread, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. This was not just a thread. It was the broken filament, the source of her original failure, now returned to her. She held the thread between her fingers, its rough texture a painful reminder of the moment it had snapped. This wasn't a gift. It was a challenge, a physical, tangible representation of her public humiliation. It was a test. Would she hide from it, or would she face it? The old habits of fear and withdrawal clawed at her, urging her to throw the thread away, to bury it again. But something had shifted. The anonymous gifts had planted a seed of courage. The next few days were a battle. She would pick up the thread, feel the familiar phantom pain of her failure, and put it down again. She tried to mend an old shirt, but her hands shook. The simple, repetitive act of repair, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cowardly escape. She was no longer just mending, she was avoiding. The presence of that single broken thread made all her other repairs feel futile, a patchwork over a gaping wound. She thought about the film student, the one who saw beauty in the chaos. What would she think if she knew the full story? Lena imagined the young woman's face, her hopeful eyes, and felt a surge of shame. She had to do something. She had to prove to this anonymous stranger and to herself that she was more than her one great failure. The thread was not a reminder of what she had lost. It was a reminder of what she had to find. One night, unable to sleep, she pulled a new loom from her closet, an old one she had never used. The wood was smooth, the frame solid. She began to set the warp, the vertical threads that form the foundation of a tapestry. Her hands, once so certain, now moved with a halting, nervous energy. She felt like an imposter, a fraud pretending to be a weaver again. Every choice was a thread, and every thread was a risk. She started weaving. She used the new, beautiful threads the student had sent her, the emerald green, the indigo wool. The colors sang together, a harmony she hadn't heard in decades. But as she wove, she felt a profound sense of incompleteness. The new tapestry was beautiful, but it felt hollow, a denial of her own history. It was a false perfection. The broken thread was on her table, a silent witness. She knew what she had to do. With a trembling hand, she picked it up, feeling its rough, splintered ends. She threaded it into her needle. This was the moment of truth. This wasn't about making something perfect. It was about making something honest. It was about facing the most painful part of her past and weaving it, deliberately, into her present. She began to weave the old broken thread into the new tapestry. It was ugly, a dark, frayed line running through the beautiful new colors. It was a visible scar. It ruined the perfect symmetry of the piece. But as she wove, something extraordinary happened. The fear began to recede. The guilt began to dissipate. The pain was still there, a tangible part of the art, but it was no longer a secret. It was a part of the story. The final piece was a tapestry unlike any she had ever created. It was a landscape of vibrant colors and intricate textures, but at its heart, a dark, gnarled line of the old broken thread cut through the center. She didn't hide it. She highlighted it. She wove around it, creating a new pattern that incorporated the flaw, making it not just a mistake, but a deliberate design element. It was a physical representation of her healing, a scar made beautiful by acceptance. As she worked, the memories returned not as painful flashes but as clear, vivid images. She remembered the pride she had felt while creating the original tapestry, the way her hands had flown, fueled by a passion she had thought was lost forever. She remembered the press conference, the flashing cameras, the moment of horror as the thread had snapped. She let herself feel the full weight of that humiliation. But for the first time, she felt it as a moment in her story, not the end of it. Hidden truths and guilt began to emerge with every stitch. She realized she had not been a victim of a broken thread. She had been a victim of her own inability to forgive herself. She had believed that a single mistake could define her entire life, that one flaw could negate a lifetime of creativity. The tapestry on her loom was a living, breathing refutation of that belief. The broken thread was ugly, but it was also a testament to her endurance, a silent monument to the journey she had taken to get here. She was so engrossed. In her work, she didn't hear the knock at her door. The film student stood there, a young woman with a camera bag slung over her shoulder and a hopeful look in her eyes. "Lena," she said, her voice soft. "My name is Anya. I think I've been leaving you notes." Lena stared at her, the final strand of her masterpiece in her hand. The wall of anonymity that had protected her, that had allowed her to heal in secret, was gone. Anya saw the loom, the new tapestry, and a look of profound recognition crossed her face. She saw the bright colors, the complex pattern, and most importantly, the dark, flawed line running through it. "You finished it," Anya whispered, her voice full of reverence. You're the one who created the unraveled piece." Lena nodded, tears welling in her eyes. The truth was out. The person who had seen her greatest shame was now standing in front of her, looking not with judgment, but with awe. Anya confessed how she had stumbled upon a discarded fragment, and how its beauty had haunted her. She explained her research on forgotten artists and how the project had led her to Lena's work, without ever knowing the full, painful story. For Anya, the broken tapestry was not a failure, but a profound mystery, and her gifts were simply an attempt to reconnect a fragmented beauty. For Lena, it was the first time someone had ever truly seen her art, flaws and all, without the baggage of her past. Lena held out her hand, the broken thread still clutched in her fingers. "This," she said, her voice a rough whisper, "this is the one that snapped." Anya looked at the thread, then back at the tapestry, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. She understood now. Lena had taken the very source of her trauma and woven it into a work of art, transforming it from a symbol of failure into a symbol of resilience. The air in the room, once thick with unspoken grief, was now filled with the hum of a profound emotional connection. The climax was not in the tapestry's completion, but in the moment of shared vulnerability. Lena, who had lived for decades in a state of self-imposed shame, was finally seen, and Anya, who had sought to understand a fragmented piece of art, had been led to a human story of brokenness and healing, a story far more beautiful than any perfect creation could ever be. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of relief. Lena took a deep, shaky breath, the weight of a lifetime of guilt lifting from her shoulders. The finished tapestry was not flawless. In fact, the visible lines of her own healing made it all the more beautiful. It was a map of her journey, a testament to the fact that broken things can not only be fixed, but they can be made into something new and more meaningful. She was no longer hiding, no longer a ghost in her own life. She offered the tapestry to Anya. "This is for you," she said. "You saw the beauty in the broken pieces. You showed me how to see it too." Anya, speechless, gently took the finished piece, her eyes tracing the lines of the rewoven thread. It was not about perfection anymore, but about the beauty of a life that can be rewoven after it has unraveled. The student had sought out a forgotten artist, and in doing so had helped a woman rediscover her artistic self. The final transformation was not a grand event, but a small, powerful shift. Lena began to work on a tapestry, this time with a joy and freedom she hadn't felt in years. She no longer used only discarded threads. She incorporated new, vibrant colors. She no longer left a single loose end, but wove each piece to completion with a small, visible knot at the end of each work. She was no longer mending, she was creating. The dust sheets came off. The shrouded tapestries were finally revealed, their colors and stories filling the apartment with a new, vibrant energy. They were no longer ghosts of the past, but markers on a path of healing. The weak natural light that once felt so judgmental now felt like a spotlight, not on her flaws, but on her resilience. She had embraced her imperfections, and in doing so had found a new, deeper beauty. Her life was no longer a single broken thread. It was a magnificent, flawed, and utterly unique masterpiece. The shame was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. The broken thread, once a symbol of her failure, was now a permanent, beautiful part of her story. She was a testament to the fact that it is not the absence of flaws that defines us, but our ability to weave them into the fabric of our lives. She was finally, truly whole again. If this story moved you, you'll find many others here that might change your day. Join us, subscribe, and be part of this journey.